COVID rears again in Australia, putting pressure on the health system and potentially the economy. The federal government works to improve relations with Beijing, and for the first time in 13 years, Australia exports more coal than iron ore. It's Friday, the 8th of July, 2022. Welcome to Fear and Greed, Australia's most popular business podcast. I'm Michael Thompson, and good morning, Sean Aylmer.
Good morning, Michael. I'm looking forward to the weekend.
Well, how was your first week back after being, this time last week, you were probably on a beach somewhere in Hawaii?
Yeah, that's right. But this time of the day, we were probably just about to sit down to our cocktail hour.
Well, yeah, I struggle with time differences, so I just took a punt and said that I'm assuming that at this moment you would have a cocktail. So
yeah, but you know when you go on holidays that first week back, it's really, really long.
Yes, it absolutely is. And you start planning your next holiday pretty much before your last one's even finished.
Well, the funny you mention that, actually have booked some tickets for later in the year, because you've got to plan your holiday in your previous holiday. So, you know, when you go on a holiday, think about the next one, because once you get back to work and the maelstrom of what's going on, you really just don't get around to it. So holidays are about the next holidays, I reckon.
Can I award you bonus points for the use of the term maelstrom?
Yeah, I'm pretty impressed with it. I'm not quite sure what it means.
Well, I think you even used it correctly. So that is brilliant. Well done. And look, after the show, you've got an interesting chat today. It's all about technology and a particularly exciting type of technology. You're speaking with Yoav Amitai, who is the CEO of Elsight, which is an ASX-listed company that's helping US giant Walmart develop drone deliveries.
Yes, way out of my sphere of comfort, this one. Yoav is based in Israel, and his company is kind of helping with the software in terms of delivering smaller products for Walmart. And they've got some trials going. A really fascinating world, which I must say I knew very little about.
Yeah, it's a veritable maelstrom of technology, isn't it?
Oh, it is, Michael, it is.
All right, let's move on. The main story this morning, Sean, a very serious one really, because the Australian health system is under strain as the third Omicron wave hits the economy, triggering a surge in hospitalisations and a decision now to offer a fourth shot for people over the age of 30.
Yes, the latest variant is even more transmissible and infectious than earlier variants of Omicron. That's the one that drove a surge in cases over summer. Federal Health Minister Mark Butler yesterday said that people who have been fully vaccinated or had COVID-19 were still susceptible to this latest variant. While hospitalisation numbers are still below January's peak, they are rising quickly. There are now 3,800 patients in hospital beds with COVID-19. That's an increase of about 1,000 over the past few weeks. There's also been a 14% jump in intensive care patients in the past 10 days. The federal government is already open to providing more support to hospitals as the situation deteriorates. And Mr. Butler said there was a strong case for the pharmaceutical benefit scheme to expand access to antivirals, because take-home tablets can dramatically reduce the severity of the disease, particularly for older Australians. Yesterday, Canberra said all Australians aged 30 and over would have access to a second COVID-19 booster shot, overall a fourth jab, from Monday. That means 7.4 million people will be able to book for a fourth vaccination. The Australian Technical Advisory Group on Immunisation has specifically recommended that people aged between 50 and 64 receive a fourth dose, and people from 30 to 49 have that option. Keep in mind that there's around 5 million eligible Australians who still haven't received their third booster dose.
All right, so plenty happening in that space then. Is there any talk of lockdowns or any kind of restrictions returning?
No, not really. We're very much in the living with COVID phase of the pandemic, or it's probably an endemic now. For example, overseas arrivals will no longer need to be vaccinated. Health Minister Butler was asked about mask mandates specifically, but he said the time for them had passed, and instead most state governments were calling on people to wear masks in certain situations indoors only. So the good news there is that we shouldn't really see restrictions or lockdowns, even if numbers jump.
And what about the economic impact, Sean?
Well, over last summer, after restrictions were lifted, the big impact really was on the labour force. People were missing days at work because they had to isolate or had COVID. That's likely to be the same this time around. Of course, remote working has meant not going into the workplace has less of an impact on business. Still, there are industries such as hospitality which really could be hit hard. They don't need to be hit hard again, but that's what they face.
Okay. Now, how did local markets perform yesterday?
The S&P ASX 200 finished up almost 1% to close at 6,648 points. It was a strong day for the big miners after they had lost ground on Wednesday. BHP jumped more than 3%. Fortescue and Rio were both up more than 4%. South 32 jumped nearly 5%. Now, it had fallen pretty hard on Wednesday. The big banks were all higher, led by ANZ, which rose 1.8%, and Commonwealth Bank, which was up 1.2%. Telstra was an underperformer, falling 1.3%. Most of the movement, though, came among some of the smaller stocks. Buy now, pay later group Zipco's share price tumbled more than 5%. It's now down 95% since its peak in February last year. Incredible.
Wow.
Investment bank UBS yesterday put out a note saying it was concerned about Zip's bad debts. The buy now, pay later group hopes to complete a merger with Sezzle in coming months. It certainly needs that merger. Another one to slump yesterday was EML Payments. It finished down nearly 10% after being downgraded by another investment bank, RBC. Earlier in the week, EML's share price jumped 10% after it said it had won a deal with the Spanish government to issue 500,000 prepaid cards. Pretty much reversed that yesterday. Chalice Mining was among the best performers, up almost 7% after reporting good news on a nickel copper platinum project. The best on the day was actually biotech Imugene. The Aussie dollar is trading back above 68 US cents on the back of a jump in government bond yields. And Michael, yesterday gold fell to its lowest point this year, falling as low as $1,734 an ounce before bouncing slightly. It's still high by historical standards. We need to keep that context on the story, but its shine as a safe haven asset has certainly been tarnished a touch. Instead, investors are more interested in holding US dollars.
All right. Sean, we'll be back in a moment with the rest of the day's business news. Sean, the federal government has given one of its strongest indications yet that it's working to get closer to Beijing, with Foreign Minister Penny Wong saying she was open to engaging with her Chinese counterpart.
Senator Wong was speaking as she arrived for a G20 ministerial meeting in Bali, where she's due to meet Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi. She said it was in the interests of both Australia and China to stabilise the relationship. Australian ministers remain open to engage, Ms Wong said, and she commended Mr Wang's meeting with the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken, which is due to happen at this G20 meeting. If a meeting between the foreign ministers does take place, it will be the first one since September 2019. Now, it does look promising because on Wednesday, the China Daily newspaper ran an article saying there'd be an opportunity for Australia to, and I quote, further warm relations, end quote, with China at Bali. It is good to see the two countries at least not quite talking, but heading towards that.
Further warm relations. It all feels quite soft still, doesn't it?
Diplomacy is a fascinating thing. I digress here, Michael. I read the Hillary Clinton book on diplomacy.
Oh, yeah.
Hard Choices, I think it's called.
Yep.
And I just didn't understand how intricate diplomacy was until I'd read that book, and just how difficult it is, to negotiate in different cultures, and no one is better than the other. It's just how people perceive things. It's fascinating world.
And particularly when language is so important as well, how a single word can change the meaning. And yet you are essentially kind of negotiating across languages as well. So to me, it's just an absolute minefield and fascinating to watch.
Sure is.
And just staying in geopolitics, actually, Sean, Russia's ambassador to Australia has claimed that relations between Canberra and Moscow have reached their lowest point in decades.
No surprises there, really. Alexei Pavlovsky was interviewed on ABC's Radio National program yesterday morning, and he rejected any suggestion that his country's invasion of Ukraine was a war. He accused the media of biased reporting, and he denied Russia was responsible for hurting the global economy. He said the severe shortages of wheat and soaring gas and fuel prices were the fault of the West. Not quite sure how that one works. Anyway, we'll leave it at that.
Yeah, okay. Now, Sean, the new owner of Crown Resorts, Blackstone, have ousted the current CEO, Steve McCann, and replaced him with veteran gaming executive Kieran Carruthers. Yes,
Mr. Carruthers has run casinos in Southeast Asia, the Philippines and Las Vegas, and is currently Chief Operating Officer at Wynn Macau. Wynn Casinos, of course, being one of the world's biggest casino groups. It isn't really a surprise decision. Mr. McCann took over the job at Crown just over a year ago when the company was listed on the ASX. He had previously run Lendlease, of course. It was a fairly profitable stint at the gaming company, though, for the outgoing CEO, including his sign-on bonus and options, which vested when Blackstone bought the group. He made about $12 million for the year.
Oh, that's not bad, is it?
It's not bad.
Now, Sean, the rain in Sydney has finally abated, though there's still plenty of water around the place. But the New South Wales mid-north coast is now copping an absolute battering.
Sure is. The town of Taree, in the 24 hours to 9 a.m. yesterday morning, recorded 305 millimetres of rain. Now, that's the highest daily fall for Taree since records began in 1881. Quite incredible.
Wow.
Most of the flooding is now concentrated around the Hunter region and mid-north coast. New South Wales SES Deputy Commissioner Damien Johnston hopes the state is through the worst of the immediate flood crisis, but unfortunately, above average rainfall is forecast to continue throughout the rest of the month.
Australia's trade surplus hit a record level in May thanks to a big surge in exports, and coal has replaced iron ore as the country's single most valuable commodity.
That's right. The monthly surplus came in at $16 billion or nearly $16 billion. That's the highest ever and well above expectations. Exports jumped 9.5% thanks to higher exports of coal and liquefied natural gas. The value of coal exports is up 300% over the past year, and that's thanks to both increases in volume and prices. LNG exports are up about 120% over the past year. The actual value of coal exports in May was $14.7 billion compared to $14.5 billion for iron ore. Now, that's the first time in 13 years that coal has surpassed iron ore in value terms. There you go. It was a very strong trade result, particularly since imports were also up. They're up about 6% according to the Bureau of Statistics, but economists said given the fall in commodity prices in recent weeks and fears of a slowdown in global growth, the surplus may have peaked.
Also from the ABS yesterday, Sean, the weekly payroll jobs continue to grow more slowly than last year.
Yes, payroll jobs rose by just 0.1% in the week to the middle of June. The slower growth reflects the ongoing impacts of COVID-related disruptions and short-term employee absences. It'll be interesting to see how the unemployment figures come in next week. They are expected to fall, but there's just a few very early signs that maybe some of the heat is coming out of that job market.
Sean, Canadian group Dye & Durham has upped its bid for share registry and superannuation administrator company Link Group. Well, I suppose to be more correct, it's actually upped its lower offer. Is that right?
Yes, that is more correct. Certainly the new offer yesterday was enough to send Link's share price up 6% to $4.07. Now, the new offer at $4.70 a share is 10 cents higher than the previous bid, but well below the original offer last December of $5.50. Now, that original bid was cut on the back of turmoil in financial markets and concerns over regulatory approval. That regulatory approval is the big issue here. The Australian Competition and Consumer Commission has already issued a draft ruling saying it had significant preliminary competition concerns about any deal between Dye & Durham and Link. Now, that's because Link owns almost 43% of PEXA, which is the electronic conveyancing business. That's the same sort of business that Dye & Durham is in Canada. That's why the bid's $4.70. The share price is $4.07. That big gap is just the fact that many investors don't think the deal will get done.
And finally, Sean, Attorney General Mark Dreyfus has ordered the prosecution of lawyer Bernard Collery be dropped, ending a 4-year legal saga over the leaking of classified information about Australia's efforts to spy on the government of East Timor.
Yes, this has been quite the saga. The former ACT Attorney General was set to face trial in Canberra later this year after being charged in 2018 under the previous coalition government with offences under the National Security Information Act for allegedly seeking to help his client, an intelligence operative known as Witness K. The government has dropped that and certainly got many plaudits from independents yesterday for doing so.
Okay, moving on to overseas news, Sean, and UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson last night resigned following months of pressure, succumbing after more than 50 members of his government resigned, undermining his authority and his ability to govern.
The final straw, Michael, appeared to be his newly appointed Chancellor, Nadhim Zahawi, who only got the job on Tuesday publicly calling on him to quit. Now, he did have one final fling. He appointed 3 new cabinet ministers only, really minutes before he resigned himself. Mr. Johnson's political career, which included a period as Mayor of London, will be remembered for his success in leading the Vote Leave campaign to exit the European Union in 2016 and for his general election victory in 2019. But just as prominent, I suspect, is his role in Partygate, whereby in the midst of COVID lockdowns, Mr. Johnson and his Conservative colleagues hosted dozens of parties. Michael, covering UK politics won't be the same.
Now, Sean, Samsung Electronics reported a smaller than expected profit for the June quarter as inflation dampened demand for mobile phones and electronic gadgets.
Yeah, the company made about $15 billion for the quarter, so it's not exactly a crisis for Samsung, but it is interesting that the world's biggest smartphone and memory chip maker is feeling the pinch from inflation. Samsung boomed during the pandemic, but that outlook has certainly turned the other way.
And finally, Sean, Japan has introduced some pretty tough laws for cyberbullies. They could now face up to a year in prison.
Yeah, it follows the suicide of a 22-year-old professional wrestler and reality TV star who was absolutely hounded on social media and tragically took her life. New penalties for public abuse came into effect yesterday and include fines of up to $4,900 Aussie, that is, and 12 months in jail. Not everyone is supportive, saying the new rules could threaten justified criticism and freedom of expression. That's according to Bloomberg. The Justice Ministry said the new laws will not be used to punish public criticism of politicians.
All right, now up next is a Fear and Greed Daily interview with Yoav Amitai, the CEO of the ASX-listed tech company Elsight.
Yeah, fascinating chat about how the world is changing and how maybe someday in the future we'll get our groceries delivered by drones.
That's pretty cool, isn't it?
It is cool.
All right, that's coming up next in the Fear and Greed playlist on your podcast platform or at fearandgreed.com.au. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you, Michael.
It's Friday, the 8th of July, 2022. Make sure you're following the podcast. Join us online on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. And don't forget the new episode of Safe Word by Fear and Greed came out yesterday. Find that one wherever you listen to podcasts. I'm Michael Thompson, and that was Fear and Greed. Have a great day.